Well, first of all, let me introduce a little bit, just a little bit, the focus of my presentation here today. Well, first I should have said before that it is a pleasure for me to be here, and thanks the organizer, George, for the invitation to come to Paris and make this presentation. The title of the presentation is Spain's Deflations in the Late 19th Century. And I'm going to focus, while I'm doing the presentation, on the different roles adopted by the modern central banks at that time in relation to the roles it's adopting nowadays. It is not the topic of the presentation, but let's say it is like a byproduct of the presentation. And in order to give you some background about this presentation, let me just tell you why I have decided to develop this topic. Well, first of all, my profile, my major, let's say, comes from a macroeconomics point of view. I'm an economist. And I decided to prepare my final dissertation in order to obtain my PhD thesis in the study of the monetary policy of the ECB at that time, in the early, at the end of the 19th century, at the end of the 90s of last century. Then I was suggested by my director, my supervisor of the thesis, to go and study the predecessor of the monetary unification in Europe. That was obviously Latin Monetary Union, and why not the gold standard all over the world? It was the most successful experience of monetary unification worldwide, I would say. So I took a look at the data, and I found this data for Spain. You see the dotted line represents the deflator in the economy, and the solid line represents the evolution of the GDP in real terms. All of them is taken from a Hodge-Prescott filter, so it is a trend. We are softening the extreme values with this trend. And we are considering it in a very long perspective, from the mid-19th century until the early 21st century. As you can see, and this was the subject of my surprise, Spain did experience price stability for quite a long time. It has a succession of inflation and mild deflations until the beginning of the First World War. And then afterwards, especially after the Spanish Civil War in the 30s, and especially, obviously, in the Bretton Woods period, you can see the distortion of these two variables in contemporary history. Well, I was shocked when I look at this comparison. So I did want to pay attention to this monetary regime, because I was fascinated about the new rules we have been adopted in the last 10 years surrounding price stability and inflation stability. We are set to be fighting inflation stability since the 90s of the last century. Okay, if this is price stability, what is this? This is true price stability. So I did want to study the regime that made this possible, even for an economy such as the Spanish economy. That was quite a chaos in that century, I must say. So this is the background of my, let's say, my profile, or what I had in mind when I developed this paper, and I just wanted to let you know. So let's come back to the proper presentation. And let me give you some details about the institutional framework behind the Spanish monetary evolution in the from the middle to the late 19th century. First of all, the Bank of Spain was legally or officially established, as we know it today, in 1856. It was the successor of previous private banks with a central bank fashion since the 18th century, as you see here in the slide. Most importantly, there was not a legal tender clause at the beginning. So there were several decades, actually, until the decree of 1874 that granted monopolios issued to the Bank of Spain in 1874, as I said. There were several years, almost 20 years, of monetary competition in Spain. Then in relation to the Latin Monetary Union, Spain did want to adhere to the new monetary developments in Europe. So it made a currency unification in terms of the peseta, the currency that we have had until the adoption of the euro. The peseta was launched in 1868, as I said, with the aim to join to the modernization of the Spanish monetary system in relation to the rest of the European countries. It became the new and single national currency erected on a bimetallic base, as in many other countries, but the conversion of paper notes into gold was suspended in 1883. There were 2 episodes of gold reserve shortages in the early 80s, and Spain had to abandon convertibility in gold in that year. So in a world ruled by the gold standard, as you know, a silver-based currency at that time was in fact, and I did in Spain, a fiduciary currency, to be honest. But most important, the Bank of Spain, not only officially, but also by its own means, behave on several limits on the issue of banknotes. So the supply of notes was limited, was restricted. Even though Spain abandoned convertibility in the 80s, it behaved as if it were following, let's say, a gold standard in that period, even though not officially, as I said. Well, let me come back to the roles of the central bank in that period. Well, here you have the printing of the drawing of James Gilray. I don't know if you are familiar with the job of this artist. To me, he's a master in explaining central banking worldwide, I would say. I would be able, I think, to develop a whole course on monetary policy from a modern perspective using his caricatures. Well, he's depicting here Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger in the end of the 18th century, issuing paper money from his mouth and having the reserve in his stomach, as you see here, which is obviously gold. So this is the, as he suggested in the title of the caricature, it is the Midas king transforming all into paper, not into gold, but just the reverse Midas king into paper. Well, we know this is a description of the gold standard at that time. This is the classical description. And in the case of Spain, as I said, there was not officially convertibility in gold from 1883, but paper was subject to quantitative limits from that year on. This is the important thing. So monetary expansion was limited, and thus monetary supply. This was the case in Spain. And if we want to describe the monetary rule at that time, I would say that the Bank of Spain developed a banking target, a financial or market-based target. It was not really a macroeconomic policy nor a monetary policy at all, at least in the case of Spain, I mean. But if you take a look at the records of the Bank of Spain meetings, they were very worried about maintaining the convertibility of notes. This was the primary target of the officials of the Bank of Spain, and they had quite many discussions with the Treasury about this in all the period. This is one of the most important tasks of the Bank of Spain. If you take a look at this chart, I am describing here the Bank of Spain discount rate from the 60s until the beginning of the First World War. You can see the shadow parts of the chart representing a fall of the gold reserves in the bank, bolts. And at that period, the Bank of Spain did increase the interest rate, the discount interest rate, just to, as I said before, to follow its rule, which was the maintaining of the convertibility criterion. This was quite logic, and it was the expected increase in the discount rate to support the reserves of the currency. Well, this is the second, and I would say the first, role of the Bank of Spain. it is not a singular role. You can adapt this role to many other banks, I would say to the Banque de France as well. And here you here you see the same prime minister. It is the same guy. It is the same artist, William Pitt de Janga, assaulting the old lady. The old lady thus has been the name attributed to the Bank of England, the old lady of Threadneedle Street, which is the street in which it is placed in London. So you can see here, I wouldn't say it is a loan, though I wouldn't say it is an agreement. I think it is an assault, and it was really the title of James Gilray's drawing. It is the old lady of Threadneedle Street in danger, because well, I wouldn't like to translate you see everything there. I think that you can do it by yourselves. I don't want it to be in the records of this conference, but you know, this lady is claiming that she didn't really like to make that loan to the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister is putting his hands into the pockets of the lady, taking and robbing the gold coins. Okay, we know this is just a metaphor, obviously. We know that from time to time the monetary rule of the bank was subordinated to the financial needs of the Treasury. And it was indeed the case of Spain at that age, especially because the taxing system in Spain was very weak, let's put it in this way. So, I decided just to do an approximation to the data, and this is just another element of the data. And I just decided to regress the evolution of money supply in relation to the in relation to the credit needs of the Treasury. And you can see that, well, first an exceptional episode which was related to the Cuba and Philippines independence wars at the end of the 19th century. Obviously, the state, what I mean, obviously, that it was the general trend at that time. The Treasury asked for an extraordinary lending from the Bank of Spain. So you can see here the extraordinary increase in the supply of money related to this extraordinary episode, obviously. And then you can see that the evolution of the dotted line, which is the registered money supply, the fitted money supply, here, the dotted line, and this is the solid, which is the registered money supply, is very much explained by the evolution of the credit policy of the Bank of Spain and the financial needs of the Treasury. This is, I would say, this is obvious in the case of Spain, but I just wanted to give you some support to this finding. Finally, here I made an exception, and I didn't follow James Gilray's caricatures, but I followed another one, John Tenniel. And we know by this caricature that the old lady, this is the old lady, that after several years, after 100 years, looks like very similar to the previous one, still an old lady. And she's given some support, some financial assistance to misbehaved banks that were too risky in the past and are going to the window of the Bank of England asking for extraordinary lending. I think that we find this episode very familiar in the last year. It happened many times before. And as we know, the Bank of Spain, the central banks behave as the banks of the commercial banks. It was indeed the case in Spain as well. So it provided clearing facilities. It was the central reserves of the financial system. It provided regular credit, it did. And even though in the case of Spain, it was done it with a delay in relation to the rest of the European countries, it also provided extraordinary lending to the financial system. Well, with this economic background and monetary background in mind, let me tell you the second main focus of my presentation, which is to stress that under that monetary regime, Spain did experience a succession of mild inflations and also mild deflations, and which is most important in my view, different type of deflations. We, when I say we, the economists, always, if not always, almost always think that all types of deflations are the same. I think we're wrong. I think that you, from the historian point of view, know this much better than us. There are different types of deflations. And we have been very much concentrating on the recessive recessions coming from the 30s of last century. I think this is a very important and dangerous bias in my point of view. So I wanted to come back to the 19th century and stress that there were different types of deflations. And let me go through them very quickly, because I think that you know them as I do. From the point of view of the ultimate cause of the deflation, we have monetary deflations caused by the fall of money supply. This is an intended monetary policy followed by the central bank to decrease the supply of money supply, and thus causing a fall in the price of level. Well, this is pretty obvious. And then we do have, as the ultimate cause, deflations caused by real factors. On the one side, we can identify increases in productivity related to economic growth and financial stability. And thus, this increase in productivity may result in an increase in the supply of goods and services in the economy. And why not? A decrease in prices. This is what we are teaching in the textbooks, in macroeconomics and microeconomics. But then, well, these are called supply-side, productivity-based, or benign deflations. The benign deflations is the term Bordeaux suggested in his paper. And then we also have, obviously, the recession we always have in mind, we the economists, the recession of the 30s, of the Great Depression. There is a fall of expectations, there is a recession, there is financial instability, and thus we have unemployment, we have a GDP fall, etc. So we have recessive negative deflations. Well, I just wanted to stress that I'm using here the quote of Bordeaux Sparks of the late 70s of last century, saying that even though following a monetarist point of view, we can explain these productivity-based deflations. And this is very simple. Taking the quantity equation in mind, we see that if there is, this is the quantity equation, I don't know if you can see it from there, because it is too low maybe. Well, if we have an increase in productivity, and thus an increase in the GDP, in the supply of goods and services in the economy, and you hold constant money supply, and there is no changes in the velocity of money, obviously you may have, as the resulting factor, you may have falling prices. And this is quite a monetarist explanation type of deflations, even though caused by real factors. I just wanted to stress this, but I don't want to make some more detail on this. Okay, now we have the identification of the types of deflations, and we're going to see the types of deflations we may identify according to the Spanish data. Well, these shadow parts of the chart represents periods of increasing in productivity in Spain, mainly in the agriculture, but mostly in the industrial sector. And you can see here, this is the solid line representing here under this level a deflation. We have another deflation here and almost another deflation here. These are trends, so I can tell you that the deflation was a little bit higher here in this case, and higher here and also here. I'm taking just the trends, just for you to know. Okay, this dotted line represents GDP growth in terms of the rates of growth. So you are seeing here, well, quite a stable accelerating growth of the Spanish economy inside a productivity growth period. So this is a benign deflation in the case of Spain. There is no but at all with this. Okay, this is something that I would expect and I do like to have in my country. Then you have a period of increase of productivity, but a decelerating economy. And we did experience a fall in inflation, not really a proper deflation, but a fall in the inflation rates. Again, a benign disinflation in this case. Then we had the very severe and strong recession of the agriculture sector, representing more or less 60% of the Spanish economy. So you can notice here a recessive deflation. This is quite obvious, and a stagnated economy. This is what I would say. And finally, there was a monetary deflation as a result of the implementation of the of an adjustment, a fiscal and monetary adjustment plan called Villaverde Plan that wanted to come back to the orthodoxy in Spain at the beginning of the 20th century, because previously with the colonial wars, independence wars, Spain suffered quite a big deficit in the public sector, so we decided to conduct an orthodox policy, and thus it caused, again, deflation, but a monetary deflation, an intended deflation at home. These are the three types of deflations that I wanted to stress here today. Again, in terms of money supply growth, which is the solid line here, this is the evolution of the reserves in the country. You can see that the Villaverde Plan, it was basically what we would call today fiscal and monetary contraction. It was coming back to orthodoxy after the finance of the Cuban and Philippines wars in the end of the 19th century. So again, this decrease in the money supply was followed by a deflationary episode in Spain, a monetary based, I would say. If, I don't know how much time do I have? Okay, because I don't want to do what I asked the others not to do yesterday. Well, if we make a comparison between that situation at that age and the current situation of Spain on even the European economy, I would say that we have lost an opportunity to take some important lessons from the past. Well, under a non-fully fiat monetary system, such as there was the case of Spain in that years, though restricted by convertibility notes or legal restrictions after the abandonment of convertibility, there was not a price stabilization rule. There was not. I would say that there was not monetary policy per se, as we know it now. But the result of the policy developed by the central bank was the following of mild inflations and mild deflations and on average price stability. Price level in the mid-18th century was very similar, very much similar to the price level prior to the beginning of the First World War in Spain. I'm Spanish, and I must say that I'm surprised. I was shocked when I look at that data, to be honest. There is no a possible comparison of this data, not concerning Spain, but concerning Germany, United States, Japan, any other country in the 20th century. There is no other. Please let me know if you find this data, because I will be eager to study it. Well, the second important point of thing that I wanted to stress is that under that regime, since there was not a price stabilization rule, the Bank of Spain didn't have to offset those benign deflations. It was not in the agenda. It was not in the status of the bank. So it didn't have to print more money in order to offset that deflationary trend in the economy. Why that? It didn't have to. It was not a bad outcome of the economy. It was a growing economy with increasing in productivity. So why then increasing money growth in order to offset it? As a result of this, I was wanting to say that price stability was the result of the limited money growth. And in the modern jargon, it would be called a nominal income rule. This is something that I would like to talk to you later if you want. But obviously, thank you. But obviously, there was not a panacea. And the Treasury did affect the monetary policy of the state. And I say here that it was an independent bank, it was a private bank, but it was very much influenced by the Treasury. This is obvious. Well, if we compare that scheme with the one that we have in our days with the central banks, we have obviously a 100% fiat monetary system. And modern central banks has adopted or has been told to adopt a price stabilizing monetary rules, either de facto or de jure in the statutes. This is a fact. So low inflation and no price stability, I want to stress, low inflation has been a policy target. And thus, in case of a productivity-based deflation, and it was the case in the 90s, during the last expansion in the world economy, the central bank still had to pump money into economy in order to avoid a fall of prices below that rate of growth of inflation. This was the target. So they did a very good job because we told them to do this. So we cannot blame now for the consequences of excessive money growth. And formally, we know that we have, in our days, independent central banks. Well, but this is formally, because they are not such independent as we have seen in the last 3-4 years, either for the good or for the bad, but I wouldn't say they are independent at all, in real terms. If you want to compare the rate of growth that I put before of money growth in Spain in the second half of the 19th century with the rate of growth of the Eurozone in the last years since the beginning of the launch of the euro, you can see that the rate of growth was rather mild at the beginning, around 4 or 5% of money growth, broad money growth I'm meaning here. And then after 2002, 2003, it started to grow very much. And it also hit double-digit figures in the last years prior to the crisis. Okay, and here, during all this period, we were told that we were following price stability target. Okay, there is something wrong in here. That's what I wanted to stress, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much for this very interesting start this morning. Some questions, please.
Just 3 points. First, I don't know about Spain, but I know quite well about Germany and other the UK for the 19th century. And if you do not filter prices as you do here, what you would typically see is that you have a lot of annual variation, which is, I mean, very different from price stability because it's just you don't care about prices and you have a lot of volatility about commodity prices, which is one of the major reasons why you have business cycles and crises in the 19th century. So it is very different from price stability.
But you mean regarding prices only?
Sorry?
Sorry, you only mean prices?
Yeah, I mean...
You are talking about volatility in prices?
Yeah, volatility in prices. The second one is that, I mean, what we have seen that typically the result of a benign deflation is that you have a displacement from one sector to another. So if you have real decreases in prices, for example, in the traded goods, you will have an inflation in a non-traded good, which is, I mean, something that is at the root of financial crisis, for example, or the one we have seen recently. And the third one is that I'm not sure how proper is the comparison between money growth in the 19th century and money growth now, because I think that you are taking into account two very different things. On the one hand, you have central bank money, and on the other hand, you have all of the...
No, both are, just to reply rapidly to the last question, on both charts I represented a broad money growth. And M3, what we will call in the 19th century M3 growth, including deposits and short time duties.
Yeah, the problem with the 19th century is that you don't have a lot of monetization in the economy.
Well, that's as much as we can do is just to include not only paper notes, but only deposits of the banks. So I decided to include the broadest measure of money
I
supply.
see. No, what I mean is that even if you take into account this, for the 19th century, you have an economy that is not so much monetized. But so it is quite difficult to have a clear comparison between the two.
Oh, but
because structurally, these are two very different economies.
Okay. I'm not founding my thesis on the comparison between this chart and the other. I just wanted to stress the difference in the magnitude of the rate of growth at that time of money supply and in our days. Obviously, you're totally right. There are enormous differences in the monetary system, in our current monetary system, and that, especially in Spain. Totally right. But I just wanted to be fair and compare a broad monetary measure at that time, which is this solid line that I'm representing here, and the one that we have now in our statistics, as you say, and you suggested, coming from different monetary structures, I know. But even though taking these limitations in mind, if you take the rate of growth of this, of the growth of money supply in the 19th century, and you compare it with those figures that I showed you, my God, there is a huge difference. And we are much more monetary inflationists in our days than we were before. And I think that it relates very much to the mandate we are giving to the central bank now in comparison to the non-mandate the central bank had at that time. So this is just something that I wanted to suggest. If we want to make a reform in the current status of the central banks in order to mirror what we did good in the past. This is something that I just wanted to suggest, nothing more than that. And regarding the, sorry, I don't know if you finished your questions. And regarding the first one, yes, you are right. I also have in the paper, and I do have it here in this Spanish version of the paper, but I'm sure that you can take a look at that because the charts are very easy to follow, even though in Spanish. And there are much more important rates of variations if you don't take the filter. That's totally right. But I didn't want to rely very much on the Spanish statistics, not only because they are Spanish, but because I don't find reliable several statistics that from one year to another, they can go from -7%. Yeah, really, I have checked the Spanish statistics. Sorry, but regarding the growth of the economy as well. From -7 to...
You have business cycle, it's all Europe. You got that in all Europe. I can give you French.
No, I saw the same things because you know that we have been working with the European statistics data. But from our point of view, from the point of view of the medium-term and long-term statistics, I'm not saying that our colleagues are doing a bad job. I'm saying that if you are focusing on monetary policy and the relation of monetary policy to the evolution of prices, I want to focus on the medium to the long-term horizon. That's what I wanted to do. That's the reason why I took projections in the medium to the long term. And the best thing to do is to smooth the variation of the data in the short term. That's the only thing that I wanted to do.
We have one intervention here, and then I have to close this round because time runs out. The discussion takes a lot of time, and so I'm sorry.
Yeah, so in short, well, whatever monetary system each country has, it is quite clear. Even China, they had depression, especially with agricultural product from 1880 to 1893. And around 1994, 95, the agriculture price increased. So whatever monetary system has, the world synchronized the price movement, whatever monetary system has. So we should take the price movement independent from the monetary system. So I always insist we should not take, even if it's quite difficult, we should not take a velocity given. So after it's quite clear, the price movement, the 20 years before World War I, it's a time for terms of trade with agricultural products, they improved, while in contrast, 80s, the terms of trade with agricultural products very bad. So we should discriminate the velocity, the relating to agricultural goods and industrial goods, etc. So I think it's give us to make some comparisons would be more effective? Yeah, so that's all.
Well, the thing is that it was the case in many other advanced economies. I have taken a look at the UK data, and it was exactly the same. Well, not obviously the pergification of the deflations, but it was only something that it did happen in the UK, the succession of mild deflations. And what I just wanted to suggest here is that what it is pretty obvious from the point of view of historians, and you have suggested it for China as well, in relation to the agriculture product, it is not an obvious conclusion from the economist's point of view and from the current point of view of economists. And I'm telling you that this is something that I have been struggling to tell to my colleagues, because during the last expansionary cycle, 15 years I would say of expansionary cycle, we have been prompting money into the economy, issuing money into the economy, even though we had a deflation in the world market economy, coming from an increases in productivity in two big actors, India and China, and the opening of the world markets. So shouldn't we reform the monetary rules of our central banks in order to achieve price stability, true price stability? I would say yes. Have we done that? No. And this is something that I wanted to stress from the point of view of the Spanish economy in the 19th century. That was my only modest, mild target.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to cut here now. I'm sorry. And now we cross the Mediterranean Sea and go to Africa and hear something about the Maria Theresienthaler, to call it in German.